Have you ever noticed how exhausting it can be to speak your truth and still feel unheard? Not the loud truth, not the kind that forces itself into a room, but the quiet truth that lives in your bones, the kind you discover slowly, through reflection, through pain, through the nights when sleep doesn't come easily. You try to share it, maybe carefully, maybe gently, hoping someone will understand. Yet instead of being met with understanding, you're met with dismissal, confusion, or that subtle empty silence that tells you they never really heard you at all. There is a certain ache in that moment, a sinking feeling in the chest, a soft collapse inside the soul. You begin to wonder, why does it feel so difficult to express what is so clear within me? Why does it feel like speaking in a language only I know, a language others aren't willing to learn? You may try again. You adjust your tone, your words, your timing. You try to be calmer, kinder, more patient. You try to explain not just what you feel, but where it comes from, why it matters, why you need this understanding so badly. But the result is the same. Your truth slides past them, unnoticed, like water running off stone. And in that moment, something deeper stirs inside: frustration, sadness, confusion, and even doubt. Doubt in yourself, doubt in your clarity, doubt in your worth. The mind whispers, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I don't know how to communicate. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe I am asking for something no one else can give. But pause for a moment. Sit with this gently, because the pain of being unheard is not just about communication. It is about yearning, a yearning to be witnessed, a desire so fundamental that it sits at the core of our humanity. To be understood is to feel real, to feel seen, to feel like our inner world has a place in the outer world. When we speak and are not understood, something inside us feels erased. Not violently, not dramatically, but quietly, like a candle flickering in a room where no one notices the flame. This is why the pain feels so intimate, why it lingers long after conversations end, why you replay the same moments in your mind, rehearsing what you could have said differently, why you walk away not just tired of others, but tired of yourself, because every attempt to be heard that ends in silence doesn't just fail to communicate your truth. It teaches you slowly to close, to fold inward, to carry everything alone. And yet, here is the deeper, quieter question beneath all of this. Why do you feel the need to be understood by them specifically? Why them? Why this person? Why this group? Why this audience? What part of you reaches outward again and again, even when experience has already shown you how the story ends? The truth is, we seek understanding from those who cannot give it, because we believe that if we can convince them, then our truth becomes more real. We don't notice this consciously. But the ego, in its subtle cleverness, equates validation with truth. If they understand me, then what I feel is valid. If they agree with me, then I am safe. If they reflect back to me the depth I know inside, then I don't have to carry the fear of being alone with myself. And so we speak, and speak, and speak, not because the words aren't clear, but because the fear of being alone in our awareness is terrifying. But consider this. What if the problem is not your clarity, but their readiness? What if you are not speaking to the unwilling, but to the unprepared? There are truths you cannot understand until you have lived through the storms that shape them. There are insights that require heartbreak, humility, self-confrontation. Some people have not yet walked the internal terrain that gives your words meaning. To them, your truth is a foreign landscape. They cannot see what you see because their eyes have not yet adjusted to the light. So the question is not whether you are speaking clearly. The question is whether the ears you are speaking to have yet awakened to hear. And that realization is where the shift begins, not in forcing others to understand you, but in learning to recognize when someone does not yet have the capacity to join you where you stand, not because they are lesser, not because they are stubborn, simply because their journey has not taken them there yet. And so the invitation becomes softer, gentler. What if you stopped arguing? What if you stopped pleading? What if you stopped exhausting yourself, trying to prove what is already true within you? What if your voice, your truth, your inner knowing is something sacred, and not everyone is meant to hold it? Number two, the emotional strain of being misunderstood. There is a quiet heaviness that settles in the heart when you keep trying to explain yourself to someone who isn't listening. Not the surface kind of not listening where they're distracted or busy, but the deeper kind where they are present in body yet absent in understanding. You can feel it in the air between you, the distance, the barrier, the subtle wall of interpretation they won't lower. And as you try to speak, you can sense their mind rearranging your words into meanings that have nothing to do with what you intended. It is like being translated into a language you do not recognize. You begin as yourself, and by the time your words reach them, you are someone else entirely. The fatigue comes not from the talking itself, but from the constant repairing of the cracks left behind every time your inner world gets misrepresented in someone else's mind. It creates a very specific kind of exhaustion, an emotional strain that doesn't show on your face but weighs heavily on your spirit. You may finish the conversation still standing, still calm, perhaps even smiling politely. But inside, there is a slump, a disheartened sigh, a soft dimming. You walk away feeling smaller, even if no one raised their voice. This is the exhaustion of explaining yourself to someone who has already decided who they think you are. When someone listens only to respond, not to understand, there is no space for your truth to land. It bounces back toward you, distorted and incomplete, and you are left holding the silence afterward like a weight on your chest. Over time, this kind of emotional misalignment does something subtle but profound. It makes you doubt the value of your inner experience, not because your experience is untrue, but because no one mirrors it back to you. Human beings learn themselves through reflection. When a child looks into the eyes of someone who loves them and sees acceptance, they learn, I am safe, I am real. When an adult looks into the eyes of someone who does not understand them, they begin to question, am I speaking nonsense? Am I too much? Am I too deep, too sensitive, too different? Even the most self-aware person can begin to feel like a stranger to themselves when the world does not respond in resonance. And so the emotional strain is not just about communication, it is about identity. When your truth is repeatedly unheard, a part of you wants to withdraw. You start saying less, revealing less, expressing less. You shrink not because you want to be smaller, but because you are tired of handing your heart to those who do not know how to hold it. There is a loneliness that comes with this shrinking, a loneliness so quiet that even you may not notice it at first. You start showing only the version of yourself that is easiest for others to digest. You smile a little more on the outside and feel a little less alive on the inside. You adapt, you simplify, you reduce. But there comes a moment, inevitable for those who feel deeply, when the internal pressure becomes too much. When the truth inside you refuses to remain compressed. When silence no longer feels like peace, but self-abandonment. And that is when the emotional fatigue turns into emotional clarity. The realization that the pain you feel isn't coming from the truth, self, but from trying to place it into hands that cannot hold it. Because being misunderstood does not mean you are wrong. It does not mean your clarity is flawed. It means the listener is not in the place within themselves where your words can land. We assume that communication is a matter of vocabulary and expression, but it is far more delicate than that. Communication requires shared consciousness. You can only meet someone at the depth they have met themselves. And so the emotional wound of not being understood is really the wound of being alone in your awareness, the wound of carrying insights, feelings, realizations, and tenderness that have nowhere to go. The wound of speaking from the heart and being met with minds that are guarded, defensive, or uninterested. It is not the truth that exhausts you. It is the resistance it meets. This is why you feel tired afterward, not just mentally, not just emotionally, but spiritually. Your voice holds your essence. Every time you speak your truth, you are offering a piece of your inner world. And when that offering is dismissed, minimized, or misinterpreted, your spirit feels it. The strain comes from giving your depth to a conversation built to stay at the surface. So the exhaustion you feel is not a sign that your truth is too heavy. It is a sign that you have been placing sacred things in unprepared hands. When you understand this, something inside begins to shift, not in bitterness, not in resentment, but in quiet discernment. You start to realize that your voice does not need to be louder. It needs to be placed where it can be heard. And that is where the healing begins. Number 3, the ego's attachment to being understood. There is a tender place inside each of us that longs to be seen, not in the shallow sense of attention, not in the loud desire to stand out, but in a quiet longing to be recognized for who we are beneath the surface. When we try to express something meaningful and another person doesn't, understand, it is not merely a failed conversation. It touches this tender place. It stirs the ego. Not the ego as arrogance or superiority, but ego as identity, the fragile sense of this is who I am. And when that identity is not reflected back, the ego trembles, believing itself to be at risk. So we speak again and again, not to share, but to defend, to protect the self we so carefully constructed, the self we wish to be known as, the self we believe is true. The ego fears invisibility. To be unheard feels like erasure. To be misunderstood feels like distortion. When the ego speaks, it is not merely communicating a thought, it is communicating existence. This is why trying to explain yourself to someone who refuses or is unable to understand you feels like the world is collapsing inward. The ego believes that being understood is proof that you are real, valid, coherent. So when understanding does not come, the ego panics quietly. It does not always show itself in loud ways. Sometimes it shows up as a gentle tightening in the chest, a sigh, a knot in the stomach, feeling of sinking in the heart, a retreat of energy from the eyes. This is why silence can feel humiliating, why confusion in another person's face can feel like a personal failure, why disagreement, even when handled politely, can feel like emotional abandonment. Your words are not just information, they are identity reaching outward, seeking reflection. And when reflection does not return, the ego whispers, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I do not make sense. Maybe my inner world is flawed. The ego is not trying to be dramatic, it is simply trying to survive. The ego does not know that you are larger than the stories others hold about you. It does not know that your truth remains real even when unacknowledged. To the ego, reality is a mirror. Without reflection, it believes it disappears. But here is the deeper truth. The ego confuses being understood with being valid. It does not know the difference. The ego seeks proof of self through others. It does not feel safe resting in the quiet certainty of inner knowing. It wants witnesses. It wants confirmation. It wants agreement, because agreement feels like safety. But that safety is temporary, fragile, and dependent on external approval. The ego does not know how to breathe in a world where others do not validate its experience. It keeps reaching outward for understanding, even when doing so hurts. This is why arguments become circular, why the same explanations come out in different words, why we stay in conversations long past the point of usefulness. We are not trying to clarify, we are trying to be affirmed. We are trying to hear from outside ourselves, yes, I see you, I hear you, you make sense. Your reality is real. And when we don't receive that, the instinct is to speak louder, go deeper, try harder. Not because the other person is open to understanding, but because our ego is afraid of disappearing into the silence. But here is the key realization that loosens the grip. The truth of your experience does not become less true when someone else fails to understand it. Their inability to understand does not diminish your clarity. Their resistance is not a measurement of your wisdom. Their deafness is not proof that your voice is unworthy. Your inner world does not require permission to exist. The ego believes that truth must be shared to be real. But reality is not democratic. It does not depend on consensus. You can know something deeply and no one else may understand, and it can still be true. This does not mean we close ourselves off. It does not mean we become cold or unreachable. It means we learn to hold our truth gently, without forcing it into places where it cannot survive. And something shifts when this becomes clear. The hunger to convince begins to quiet. The urgency to prove yourself softens. The need to explain your heart to those who do not want to know you starts to dissolve. A deeper, quieter confidence takes its place, the kind that does not need agreement to stand, the kind that does not disappear when unacknowledged, the kind that knows truth is not something that must be believed to be real. This does not mean the ego disappears. The ego is human. It will still flinch when misunderstood. It will still long for reflection. But now you can hold the ego with compassion. You can say to it softly, "I see you. I understand, but we are safe, even here." And that is where freedom begins, not in being understood, but in no longer needing to be. Number 4, why some people cannot hear you yet. There comes a moment when you realize that understanding is not a matter of intelligence. It is not about vocabulary, education, or logic. It is about readiness. A person can have all the words, all the concepts, all the language, and still not be able to receive the truth you are trying to share. Not because they are incapable, but because they are not at that point in their inner journey where your words hold meaning. Understanding is a place within a person, and not everyone has arrived there yet. We often assume communication is straightforward. You speak, they listen, they understand. But the reality is more subtle, more delicate. People do not hear your words. They hear their memories, their fears, their beliefs, their wounds. They hear through filters shaped by everything they have survived, everything they have denied, everything they are still afraid to face. And if your truth touches a part of themselves they are not ready to see, the mind blocks it. Not intentionally, not maliciously. It is simply protection. The psyche shields itself from truths that would require change before a person feels safe enough to change. This is why someone can nod along to your words but not actually grasp them. Why they can agree intellectually but reject emotionally. Why they can repeat your insight back to you later as if it were their own but never credit your voice. They are not resisting you. They are resisting the parts of themselves your words would awaken. Some people are not ready to hear you because hearing you would mean confronting something inside themselves. It would mean acknowledging the fears they have buried, the patterns they cling to, the defenses they believe are keeping them safe. To understand you, they would need to step out of who they have been. And that is not something a person does simply because someone else wants them to. Awareness is not something you can give someone. It is something that unfolds when they are ready to hold it. And readiness is not a matter of age. It is not a matter of experience. It is a matter of courage. Some people go decades protecting the same wound because opening it feels more dangerous than living with the pain of it. Some people build entire identities on misunderstandings of themselves. To change would mean letting go of everything familiar, so they stay asleep. Not because they are unwilling to wake up, but because waking up feels like losing everything. So when you speak your truth and someone cannot hear it, it is not that your voice is unclear. It is that their inner world has not yet created the conditions for your truth to take root. Your words are seeds, but the soil in another person must be ready. You cannot force growth where the ground is frozen. This is why the same words that fall flat in one person's mind can strike lightning in another's. You may say the same sentence to someone else, and instead of confusion, you see recognition in their eyes. a softening, a breath, a quiet yes. I know this place. Understanding requires resonance, and resonance can only happen when two souls have navigated similar landscapes of inner weather. There are truths you can only hear after heartbreak, after loss, after the ego has cracked open and let the light in. Some truths require living before they can be understood. So you are not responsible for making others ready. You cannot awaken someone with force. You cannot drag them into a depth they are still afraid of. You cannot make someone see what they are emotionally protecting themselves from seeing. Your role is not to push. Your role is not to convince. Your role is simply to speak your truth when it is natural, genuine, and kind, and to release it when it is rejected. When you stop trying to make others understand, something shifts inside you. You begin to recognize the subtle signs of unopened ears. You feel it in the tension of conversation, the defensiveness, the impatience, the need to argue rather than explore. And instead of pushing harder, you become quiet, not silent in defeat, but quiet in wisdom, quiet in discernment, quiet in peace. You begin to realize that you are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to speak to those who resonate, those who are unfolding in similar directions, those who have walked through similar nights, those who are tender enough to listen without fear. With them, your words do not require effort. They flow, they land. They are received with the kind of recognition that needs no explanation. And in that exchange, your inner world is not only heard, it is held. Understanding is not something you force, it is something you meet. And that is the beginning of knowing where your voice belongs. Module 5. Learning to let go of the need to convince. There is a moment, often quiet and unnoticed at first, when the exhaustion of explaining yourself turns into a deeper understanding. The realization that continuing to speak will not build a bridge, but only drain your spirit. It is not surrender. It is not defeat. It is a soft release, a gentle exhale, a moment where you finally decide to stop pouring your inner world into hands that are not open to receive it. This moment is not loud. It does not come with declarations or final speeches. It comes in stillness, like a tide pulling back into the ocean. At first, this letting go can feel painful. The ego protests. It wants to be seen, to be recognized, to be affirmed. It wants to try once more, one more explanation, one more attempt to find the right words. But the deeper part of you, the part that has learned through experience, knows. It knows that continuing to speak is no longer an act of connection, but an act of self-loss. It knows that draining yourself to be understood is not love. It is fear. Fear of being alone in your knowing. Fear that your truth is fragile and needs agreement to survive. But truth does not need to shout. It does not need to prove itself. It simply is. So the letting go begins with a shift in purpose. You stop speaking to convince. You start speaking only to express. You stop speaking to be right. You start speaking to be real. And if another person cannot meet you there, you allow the space between you to remain. You no longer try to force closeness where there is no resonance. You no longer try to shape yourself into something easier for others to digest. You no longer abandon your depth just to feel temporarily understood. Letting go of the need to convince is an act of inner loyalty. It is choosing your inner peace over the temporary relief of being agreed with. It is choosing self-respect over emotional bargaining. It is choosing to stand in your truth even when no one is standing beside you. And in this choice, something beautiful happens. Your voice becomes softer but stronger. You stop speaking from urgency. You stop speaking from fear. Your words do not rush out anymore. They simply flow, like water that knows exactly where it is going. This letting go is not coldness. It is not withdrawal. It is clarity. You begin to understand the difference between connection and attachment. Attachment says, I need you to understand me so I feel grounded. Connection says, I share because it is true for me, not because I need you to validate it. When your sharing becomes an offering rather than a request, your voice becomes lighter. The tension leaves your chest. Your emotions stop clinging to outcomes. You speak what you feel, and then you release it into the world with open hands. No grasping, no pushing, no grasping for acknowledgement. And some people will misunderstand this shift. They may think you have become distant, guarded, or indifferent. But the truth is the opposite. You have become more sincere. Because when the need to convince falls away, what remains is authenticity. You speak only when the moment feels real. You listen more. You observe more. You no longer rush to fill silence. You no longer try to rescue the discomfort of others. You allow the truth to breathe, even when it creates space rather than closeness. This is the first real peace many people experience in their lives. When you no longer depend on others to confirm your inner reality, your relationship with yourself deepens. You start trusting your own perception. You start feeling safe in your own awareness. You begin to realize that your truth is not fragile. It does not shatter when unacknowledged. It remains steady, like a flame that cannot be extinguished by someone else's inability to see the light. Letting go also reveals something else. The people who are meant to hear you will. Without effort, without explanation, without convincing, with them, understanding happens naturally, effortlessly, softly. There is no strain, no resistance, no walls. When you speak, they don't just hear your words. They feel the place they come from. You do not need to shape your voice to fit their world, because their world already has space for yours. This is the quiet relief of recognizing alignment, the kind of understanding that does not need translation. So letting go is not about giving up on being seen. It is about refusing to shrink or shout for visibility. It is the moment where you stop begging to be understood and start trusting that the right ears will hear you. And when this trust settles in, your voice no longer trembles. Your heart no longer tightens. You become grounded, awake, steady. You realize that being understood is not something you chase. It is something that unfolds naturally in the right time with the right people. Number 6, redirecting your voice to those who feel you without explanation. There is a quiet, almost miraculous shift that happens when you stop trying to be understood by those who cannot hear you and begin to notice the ones who can. The first thing you realize is that true understanding does not require effort. You don't have to justify yourself, translate yourself, or soften your depth. Your truth does not have to be packaged, edited, or made smaller to be digestible. With the right people, your words do not need defending. They simply land. They do not just understand what you say, they understand the place inside you from which the words arise. These are the people who hear the silence beneath your sentences. They can sense the meaning behind your pauses. They don't interrupt to react, they listen to receive. They don't listen in order to respond, they listen to know you. And in this type of presence, something in you relaxes. The part of you that has always been bracing, waiting to be dismissed, misunderstood, or minimized, softens. Your voice becomes gentler, not because you are holding back, but because you no longer feel the need to push. Your truth becomes clearer, not because you rehearse it, but because you feel safe speaking it. This kind of resonance is not common. It does not happen with everyone. And that is what makes it sacred. Not everyone is meant to understand you. Not everyone is meant to walk beside you. Your voice is not meant for every ear. Your heart is not meant for every hand. Your truth is not meant for every mind. But there are people, sometimes few, sometimes arriving quietly and unexpectedly, who meet you where you are without requiring you to dim your light or explain your depth. These are the ones who have also sat with their own nights of questioning, who have felt the ache of misalignment, who have navigated the silent storms of the soul. When two people who have met themselves meet each other, there is no strain, No convincing, no persuasion, just recognition. I know this place too, their presence says. You are not alone in it. When you begin directing your voice toward these kinds of connections, your relationship with communication changes. You no longer speak to be validated. You speak to share. You speak to connect. You speak to express what is real, not to make it real. Your words stop being arguments and start being offerings. You stop defending your heart and start revealing it. This is the difference between trying to be understood and simply being known. Your energy shifts as well. You become more discerning with where you place your voice, your time, your emotional labor. You no longer pour yourself into conversations that leave you feeling depleted. You no longer try to stretch your spirit into spaces that cannot hold it. You begin to see communication not as an obligation, but as an exchange. And you learn to recognize imbalance, not with resentment, but with clarity. There is no anger in this shift, no bitterness, only understanding. You begin to see that everyone is walking their own timeline, their own level of awareness, their own emotional seasons. Some people are still growing toward where you are. Others may never reach it. And that is okay. Your journey is not a referendum on theirs, nor is theirs a measure of yours. When you stop forcing understanding, you begin to respect the pace at which others are unfolding. And suddenly, the loneliness you once felt when no one could hear you begins to transform. You start finding the ones who can, sometimes slowly, sometimes quietly. But when they appear, the connection feels like coming home. There is no performance, no tension, no proving, just being, just presence, just truth meeting truth. And in that you learn something essential. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong ears. Your depth was never excessive. It simply required depth in return. Your voice was never lost. It was waiting for resonance. When you redirect your voice to where it can be held, you stop feeling like your truth is heavy. You stop feeling like your sensitivity is a burden. You stop feeling like your inner world is something to hide. You begin to see that your depth is not something to compress. It is something to share with those who can meet it without fear. This is how you reclaim your voice, not by speaking louder, but by speaking where your truth can live fully. Not by making others ready, but by recognizing those who already are. And once you find these people, or even just one, you will understand something you may have forgotten. You are not difficult to understand. You were simply speaking to those who were not ready to listen. Number 7, closing reflective rehook. There is a peace that arrives only after you have exhausted every attempt to be heard, a peace that is not born from triumph, but from release. From realizing that the silence you feared was not emptiness, but spaciousness. A space where your voice no longer echoes against walls that do not open. A space where your heart no longer strains to be translated. A space where the weight of proving yourself finally dissolves into something gentler. You begin to understand that not every conversation is meant to become understanding, and not every silence is rejection. Sometimes silence is clarity. Sometimes silence is self-respect. Sometimes silence is the soul saying, there is nothing more to give here. Let us return home. Home is not a place outside of you. Home is the inner chamber where your truth lives quietly, without needing applause or agreement, where your knowing rests without tension, where your heart breathes without armor. When you stop trying to be understood, you begin to inhabit yourself again. You return to the inner space where your awareness sits like still water. The surface no longer ripples with every misunderstanding. The world outside no longer defines the reality inside. You become grounded, not in certainty, but in acceptance. You begin to see the world differently. You notice how much noise exists in conversations that pretend to be deep, how much defending and justifying and debating passes for connection, how often people speak from fear rather than truth. You see it gently, without judgment. You recognize the places where you once lived. You recognize the part of you that once pushed, pleaded, tried. And instead of shame, you feel compassion because you were not wrong. You were simply yearning for something real. And the yearning itself was wisdom. The ache to be understood was never a flaw. It was the signal that your soul was trying to find its reflections in others. You were searching for resonance, for intimacy, for truth that could be shared. You were looking for the places where you did not have to guard who you are. This longing was evidence of your depth, not your weakness. But now you know that the ones who cannot meet you there are not obstacles. They are simply elsewhere in their unfolding. So you release them, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with a gentle exhale. They are where they are. You are where you are. And there is no need for either to become something else. In this release, your heart becomes lighter. The world grows quieter, but not smaller. The connections that remain are the ones that matter. The conversations that continue are the ones that nourish. The relationships that survive this shift are the ones rooted in truth, not performance. You begin to feel supported not by quantity, but by quality. Not by how many hear you, but by how deeply a few do. And in this spaciousness, something beautiful becomes clear. Your voice never needed to be loud. It only needed to be placed with care. Your heart never needed to harden. It only needed to stop offering itself to unready hands. Your truth never needed to be explained. It only needed to be lived. You are no longer speaking to convince. You are speaking to express. Expression, in its purest form, is an act of freedom. You are no longer waiting for understanding to feel real. You are no longer shrinking yourself to prevent misunderstanding. You are no longer bending your spirit to fit into places that do not know how to hold depth. You have become the witness of your own experience, the listener of your own voice, the guardian of your own truth. And now, anyone who hears you from this place hears not a plea but an offering, not a request but a presence, not a need but a knowing. You have stopped arguing with the world, and in doing so, you have finally begun to speak. So the next time you find yourself on the edge of explaining, defending, or proving, pause. Feel the body. Notice the breath. Ask yourself softly, is this a conversation or am I trying to be seen? If it is the latter, step back. Return home. Remember who you are without the echo of other minds. Your voice is not meant to be wasted. Your truth is not meant to be diluted. Your heart is not meant to be interpreted by those who are not ready to meet it. Speak where your words are felt. Offer where your soul is welcomed. Rest where you are understood without effort. The rest is simply noise.